What if the words you use every single day at home, at work, with your partner, your children, your colleagues are quietly creating either connection or conflict without you even realizing it? Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was small. Someone left the dishes in the sink. A coworker missed a deadline. A friend didn't text back. And suddenly, what began as a minor inconvenience turned into tension, defensiveness, maybe even silence. You said something. They said something. And afterward, you both felt misunderstood. Now imagine if there were a way to communicate that didn't escalate, didn't shame, didn't blame, but instead deepened understanding. Imagine conversations where even disagreement became a bridge rather than a battlefield. That possibility is the heart of Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg. This is not just a communication technique. It is a radically different way of relating to other human beings. It challenges the language we've inherited, the habits we've absorbed, and the assumptions we rarely question. And if you stay with me through this deep dive, you'll begin to see that this book is not only about talking differently, it's about thinking differently, feeling differently, living differently. Let's begin with the foundation. Marshall Rosenberg was a clinical psychologist who worked in some of the most volatile environments imaginable: schools plagued by violence, conflict zones between warring groups, communities divided by race, religion, and politics. He was not theorizing from a quiet office. He was testing his ideas in real conflict. What he observed was profound. Most of the suffering between people did not come from bad intentions. It came from the way we express ourselves and interpret others. Our language often hides our real needs behind judgments, criticism, and demands. And when people feel judged or controlled, they defend themselves. The core thesis of nonviolent communication, often abbreviated as NVCIs, that all human behavior is an attempt to meet universal human needs. Conflict arises not because needs are wrong, but because the strategies we use to meet them clash. This book is different from many communication guides because it doesn't just offer tactics. It proposes a complete shift in consciousness. Rosenberg calls it a language of life. At the center of NVC is a 4-part framework: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. But before we unpack that structure, we need to understand what Rosenberg is pushing against. He argues that most of us were trained in what he calls life-alienating communication. This includes moralistic judgments, comparisons, denial of responsibility, and demands. Think about phrases like, "You're so lazy," or "You should know better," or "That's just wrong." These statements evaluate the person rather than describe the situation. They trigger defensiveness because they attack identity. Rosenberg emphasizes that when we label someone, we stop being curious about them. Judgment cuts off connection. He also critiques the language of should. When we say someone should behave differently, we imply moral superiority. And when we hear that we should do something, we often experience guilt or resistance. Another subtle but powerful pattern he exposes is denial of responsibility. When we say, "I had to do it," or "You made me angry," we imply that our actions or emotions are caused by others. NVC reframes this entirely. We are responsible for our feelings because they arise from our needs, not from someone else's behavior. That distinction is revolutionary. Let's now move into the heart of the framework. The first component is observation. Rosenberg insists on separating observation from evaluation. This sounds simple, but it's deceptively difficult. An observation is what a camera would record. For example, you arrive 30 minutes after the agreed time. An evaluation would be, "You're always late and inconsiderate." When we blend observation with judgment, we provoke defensiveness. But when we state facts neutrally, we create space for dialogue. The deeper insight here is that clarity reduces conflict. When we describe reality without adding interpretation, we invite mutual understanding. The second component is feelings. Rosenberg emphasizes emotional literacy. Many people, when asked how they feel, respond with thoughts disguised as feelings. For example, I feel ignored is not a pure feeling, it implies someone's intention. A feeling would be, I feel lonely, or I feel hurt. Why does this matter? Because true feelings reveal vulnerability, and vulnerability fosters connection. Rosenberg emphasizes emotional literacy. Many people, when asked how they feel, respond with thoughts disguised as feelings. For example, I feel ignored is not a pure feeling, implies someone's intention. A feeling would be, I feel lonely, or I feel hurt. Why does this matter? Because true feelings reveal vulnerability, and vulnerability fosters connection. When we understand that every action is an attempt to meet a need, even harmful actions, we begin to see people differently. We stop labeling them as bad and start asking, what need are they trying to fulfill? For example, a child throwing a tantrum might be seeking attention or autonomy. A coworker who interrupts constantly might need recognition or efficiency. When we identify needs, we move from blame to curiosity. The fourth component is requests. Once we've expressed our observation, feeling, and need, we make a clear, actionable request. Not a demand, a request. A demand implies punishment if refused. A request allows freedom. For example, instead of saying, you need to be more considerate, you might say, would you be willing to text me if you're running late? Clarity transforms communication. Vague expectations create resentment. Specific requests create cooperation. Now, let's explore how this framework plays out in real scenarios. Rosenberg shares examples of couples stuck in cycles of accusation. One partner says, you never listen. The other defends. That's not true. The argument escalates. Using NVC, the first partner might instead say, when I'm speaking and you look at your phone, I feel hurt because I need connection. Would you be willing to put your phone away while we talk? Notice the shift. No blame. Clear observation. Expressed feeling. Identified need. Concrete request. This structure doesn't guarantee agreement, but it dramatically increases the chance of mutual understanding. Rosenberg also emphasizes empathy, both giving and receiving. Empathy in NVC is not advice, reassurance, or fixing. It is presence. It is reflecting back what you hear in terms of feelings and needs. When someone says, I can't believe they treated me like that, instead of offering solutions, you might respond, are you feeling disappointed because you wanted respect? This kind of reflection helps people connect with their own inner experience. Often, conflict de-escalates simply because someone feels heard. One of the most transformative parts of the book is the discussion of anger. Rosenberg challenges the idea that others cause our anger. Instead, anger arises when we interpret someone's behavior through a judgmental lens. He suggests that behind anger is always an unmet need. For example, if you're angry because someone canceled plans, the need might be reliability or connection. When you focus on the need rather than the judgment, they're selfish, you gain clarity. This doesn't mean suppressing anger. It means using it as a signal pointing to deeper needs. Another powerful concept is self-empathy. NVC isn't just about speaking differently to others. It's about relating differently to yourself. Many of us carry harsh internal critics. I'm so stupid. I should be better. Rosenberg encourages replacing self-judgment with self-understanding. Instead of I failed again, you might ask, what need of mine wasn't met? Was it competence, support, rest? Self-empathy reduces shame and increases growth. The book also addresses power dynamics. Rosenberg distinguishes between punitive power and protective use of force. Punishment seeks to make someone suffer for wrongdoing. Protective force seeks to prevent harm. For example, stopping a child from running into traffic is protective. Shaming them afterward is punitive. The deeper philosophical stance here is that violence, whether physical or verbal, arises from the belief that people deserve punishment. NVC proposes something radical. No one deserves to suffer. They deserve understanding. This philosophy has been applied in schools, prisons, and even war-torn regions. Rosenberg recounts mediating between hostile groups, by helping each side articulate their needs. When people realize that their enemies share similar human needs, safety, dignity, belonging, the narrative shifts. Now, let's zoom out to the psychological depth of this work. At its core, nonviolent communication challenges the dominance paradigm, the idea that control, blame, and punishment create order. Instead, it embraces partnership. It assumes that humans naturally enjoy contributing to others' well-being when their own needs are acknowledged. This aligns with modern research on intrinsic motivation. People are more cooperative when they feel autonomous and respected. Philosophically, NVC echoes principles of compassion found in spiritual traditions, but it translates them into practical language. It asks us to trade righteousness for curiosity, to replace winning with understanding, to see conflict not as a threat, but as information about unmet needs. However, there are challenges. Practicing NVC can feel awkward at first. The language may seem formulaic. In high-intensity situations, it's difficult to access calm reflection. There is also a risk of using NVC mechanically. If empathy becomes scripted rather than sincere, it loses power. Additionally, not everyone responds positively. Some people interpret vulnerability as weakness. Rosenberg acknowledges this. NVC is not about guaranteeing outcomes. It's about aligning your communication with your values. And that brings us to the final reflection. Nonviolent communication is not merely a set of techniques. It is an invitation to transform how you see humanity. It asks you to believe that beneath every harsh word, every defensive reaction, every act of aggression, there is a human being trying, sometimes clumsily, sometimes destructively, to meet a need. When you internalize this, resentment softens, blame dissolves, curiosity grows. You begin to ask different questions. Instead of who's right, you ask, what's needed? Instead of how do I win, you ask, how do we connect? And perhaps most importantly, instead of what's wrong with them, you ask, what's alive in them right now? If you applied even one principle from this book, pausing before judgment, expressing one clear need, offering one moment of empathy, would change the emotional climate around you. Because communication is not neutral. It either builds walls or builds bridges. And in a world that often feels divided, the ability to build bridges may be one of the most powerful skills you can cultivate. So the next time you feel tension rising, try this. Observe without judging. Name your feeling. Identify your need. Make a clear request. And truly listen to the needs beneath the other person's words. You may discover that what seemed like conflict was simply to unmet needs waiting to be understood. That is the promise of nonviolent communication. Not perfection, not agreement, but connection. And connection, in the end, is what makes us fully human.